Good afternoon. This is Cherie Goff, and today I want to talk to you again on Monday marriages. And I've said it in the last two, but the reason I called it Monday marriages is sometimes we think marriages is like a Friday, right? We've done the work, the job is over, and now we can just relax and not worry about anything. Or we treat it like it's Saturday, party every day. But the truth is, marriage has cycles, and one big part of that is the whole Monday getting back to work. Marriages take work. They don't just happen automatically. You don't just have the fairy tale and then carry on. Um, we have to work at it. So today I want to talk about offense. Offense is something that we all deal with at some level or another, right? For me, I've realized that sometimes the little things can be offensive to me, and I'm not thinking about it so much, and they disrupt my peace. So an example of this is my husband likes to stay up late, and I like to go to bed early. So he'll come to bed later after I'm asleep, and it wakes me up. And when we're young married, that really frustrated me, and um, and so I would sit there kind of angry that he had woken me up and I couldn't go back to sleep. And so now I was losing sleep. And so I was frustrated because now he made me to lose my sleep. And it was all his fault. If he would just be considerate, then I could have just slept through the night and had good sleep. But there came a point when I realized that it was my frustration that was keeping me from going back to sleep. So I made a decision. It's like, I'm just going to forgive him instantly. So he would come to bed, he would wake me up, I would get angry, and I would forgive him instantly. Now, mind you, I wasn't telling him I was angry or that I forgave him or any of that kind of stuff. This was my own internal process. But I would forgive him instantly, and then I was able to go back to sleep. And I thought, well, that's amazing. If I can sleep through the night, that is worth forgiving my husband for and not holding on to that offense. And so I begin to do that. And now if my husband wakes me up, it doesn't even bother me. It's not even an offense to me anymore. And that's kind of how offenses work. With offenses, we take hold of them. They cause us a lot of frustration. We lose our peace over them. We now start demanding other people to meet our needs, when really it's us holding on to something instead of taking it to the Lord. So offenses. Um, we were told by Jesus, right, that we must forgive in order to be forgiven. Jesus died on the cross to forgive us. I mean, everything he did revolves around forgiveness. We can't even be saved without forgiveness. And so when it comes to offenses, it's good to quickly check ourselves and to go to God with it and to simply let it go. Jesus said that his goal for us, one of his goals for us, is that we would be one with him and one with God the Father, that we would be one together, right? And with the institution of marriage, it's the same thing. He wants us to be one. It's a triune thing also, in that we should have God in our marriage and we should have our spouse in our marriage, and then us makes three, and us functioning together with God as the head, that begins to work in harmony if everybody's doing it. Of course, I realize everybody doesn't do that. You might do it and your spouse doesn't do it, and then it causes this disharmony. And so when that happens, we can't make somebody else do anything we want them to do. So it comes back to us. What are we going to do with it? Um, Sin puts God last. It's like with God, it's either first or last. There's no gradient of that. There's no gray area with God. You either put him first or you don't put him first, in which case he comes last. And when we put God last, when we have sin in our life, it disrupts the order of things between us and God. It brings separation. Things don't work properly. Well, this is the same thing with our marriage. If when we have an issue there as sin, right? Then it disrupts in our marriage also. And so I'm saying sin, you know, being angry at my husband for waking me up in the middle of the night, is that sin before God? Well, it is if there's not forgiveness. The word sin means to miss the mark. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done something horrible. It's just that there is a perfect place to be and you've missed that place. And so that brings a disruption. So if we put work before our family, if we put friends before our family, or ministry, or sinful habits, and I'm saying our family, but also before God. But if we put these things that should not be foremost before these other things, then it causes a disruption in the family. And so looking at the things that we're doing, being mindful, right? This whole thing is about working on our marriage, not just saying, well, okay, Sarah, it's going to be what it's going to be. You know, if things didn't work out, they just didn't work out. That's not how that works. We are given responsibility. Okay, so proper marriage has God first, and then it has uh, our spouse second, and us third. Now, I'm talking about marriage. I'm not talking about relationship with God. Proper relationship with God puts God first and us second, because we're working on our relationship with God. But in our marriage, it puts our spouse second. And the reason is we're told to prefer one another in love. We're told to esteem others higher than ourselves. And we think about that, you know, like in the community. Well, you know, my coworker, you know, even though I'm a doctor and he's a janitor, you know, I should still esteem him more highly than myself. You know, it becomes this humbling thing, right? But that's also applicable to our marriages, and we don't always think about that. Selfishness is what will produce offense. Now, it could be our own selfishness, right? I wanted to sleep. It could be our spouse's selfishness, you know, he wanted to come to bed late, whatever. And I'm using these, and you're saying, Cherie, that's real sweet and nice, but you know, you're talking about your husband waking you up, and you don't know my situation. My situation's bad. My spouse is abusive, emotionally, physically, whatever. Um, Let me just say this: Jesus didn't let people abuse him. He went to the cross because God asked him, will you go to the cross? And Jesus crucified his flesh, his emotions first, and then he allowed his flesh to be crucified. He went to the cross. But that wasn't abuse, that was a choice. And previous to this, we see Jesus in a crowd of people, and they decide that they're going to lay hold of him, and they're going to do harm to him. And it says that Jesus just passed through the crowd. In other words, he just kept on walking, and he was able to just go and get out of that situation and not let them simply abuse him. So if you're in a situation where you are in fear that of your health, of your life, then you are not. Then you can pass out of that situation. You can remove yourself from that situation, and God is not displeased with that at all. At all, He has not called us to be abused. But a lot of times we feel abused. A lot of people feel abused when actually they're just not getting their way. I had somebody contact me, and they said, "Oh, you know, my husband is, you know, staying out late and not coming home when I would like them to," and they said, and you know, and I can't, you know, do anything, and so I feel like my husband is being bad to me. Well, the truth of the situation is, she has produced a miserable home life because she's uh, allowed herself to do nothing, and asked him to do everything. And now she expects him to stand there and hold her hand while she does this also. And so we can have expectations of what we want marriage to be and consider that to be abusive if we don't get it, but that's not what abuse is. So there's varying levels of abuse, and I'll talk about this in a later segment. But so I don't want you to be offended or put off or say, well, Cherie's just talking about silly things because I'm talking about my husband waking me up. It's just an example. I know that there are difficulties in increasing levels out there. But when it comes back to how to work on a marriage, we can only work on our own self. We cannot work on our spouse. Now, what we do for ourselves will work on our spouse at some level or another, but we are only responsible for ourselves. Okay? So, continuing on, I want to talk about David. David was a warrior. I'm doing a devotional, trying to finish up a devotional on the Song of Solomon. And one of the images that I love in Song of Solomon is that he describes her neck as the Tower of David, with brick upon brick. And it says it's adorned with the shields, right? And so I asked the Lord, what is that? What does that symbolize? And he says, well, David was a warrior, and David fought every battle that David won every battle that he fought, that God put him on. And so when he won those battles, he would capture the shields of his enemies, of these kings, and those were on display. And in David's case, he displayed them in the temple. He didn't put them in over his mantle. He gave God the credit for it. But so you have this neck that's a strong tower. It's brick upon brick. The brick upon brick is precept upon precept. In other words, David won every battle because he did what God told him to do. And this is how we win the victory in everything. And this is how we'll gain the victory, because we're not trying to win something as much as we're trying to gain something in marriage. We will gain the victory as we do what God tells us to do when he tells us to do it, no matter how uncomfortable or difficult it is. That was Jesus, right? He went to the cross and he didn't want to. It was very hard and very difficult, and he knew it would be. And then he tells us that we need to take up our cross and follow him. Well, the first measure of ministry, to be qualified for ministry, as it talks about a deacon in the Bible, is that their house is in order. And so this is a test almost of, will we follow God right? Will we be equipped and prepared for marriage? The Bible speaks about iron sharpening iron. He puts us with people that will smooth off the rough edges, and that's not comfortable. So David, let's go back to David. I want to look at one battle with David. And it's if you want to turn to it or look at it later, it's in 1 Samuel chapter 30, and it starts in verse 1. It actually starts the previous chapter if you want to see why he was in that situation. But David was basically, he had been anointed by the prophet as king, but King Saul had not yet been removed as king, and so David was just kind of waiting. And in his waiting, Saul began to hate him and pursue him, and so David was on the run all the time. He was just trying not to die, basically. And so at one point he ends up living with the Philistines, who he had warred against previously. They were an enemy to Israel. He's living amongst the Philistines, and they're letting him go out and fight with him. But now the Philistines are going to go to war against Saul. And so they tell David, you can't go with us. We're afraid you'll turn on us in the midst of battle. And so they send him back to his place where he was living. And he'd only been gone 3 days. But in those 3 days, there was a raid against that place. And the Amalekites came, and they took captive all the women, all the children. They took everything of value, and they burned the place down. And so when David got back with his men, they were all so discouraged. It says they wept until they had no more strength to weep. And David's wives were amongst them. And it's interesting, David's wives were the one, Saul's daughter, and then Abigail. And Abigail's an interesting story. If you want to read a story about a woman with integrity who was married to a husband that had none, read Abigail. I don't know if I put that reference down, but you can look under Abigail, who is Nabal, Nabal, Nabal's wife. Um, and so she's an example of a woman who was rescued out of a difficult situation by God, not by her hand against her husband. Okay. Anyways, carrying on. So David was upset. The men that were with him to battle were upset, and they started talking about stoning David because they were so upset. They were bitter because their sons and daughters had been taken. And this is what it says. And this is verse 6, last part of verse 6. It says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So his men wanted to stone him, but David strengthened himself. And it says in verse 8, and David inquired of the Lord. And he asked him, shall I pursue? And shall I overtake him? And the Lord answered him. The Lord answered him. And the Lord said, pursue, you surely overtake him, and you shall surely rescue everything. Well, the interesting thing with the story is these Amalekites had been going around, they've been raiding all kinds of towns. So they had all kinds of wealth built up from all these places they had robbed. So when David went to get his stuff and his family back and his men's families back, he not only gained back what he lost, but he gained all this wealth that the Amalekites had gathered along the way. And he ends up building his kingdom from that. So we see David in a difficult situation. His men want to kill him. Those who are closest and dearest to him have hung to him in his flight and his plight against Saul all this time. They now wanted to kill him. And David went to the Lord and says, what shall I do? And so we can feel this way sometimes in marriage. It's like, how come I don't ever get what I want? How come things are going bad all the time? It's like, how come how come my husband doesn't treat me like I want him to, or my wife doesn't treat me like I want her to? And but when we go to the Lord, he will give us strategies to get out of situations and to begin to crawl out of the pits that we've gotten into emotionally. Okay. So let me take you to Matthew. Matthew 7:21 through 27. It says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. So, sometimes we think of this in regards to marriage or helping the homeless person. But what about our homes, right? Are we doing the will of the Father in our homes, with our marriages? Because we'll be held accountable for that too. It says, on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons and do mighty works in your names? And then will I declare to them, I didn't know you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. And everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. What's he building? His house. I thought that was interesting. Everyone who hears the instructions of the Lord, right, will be like a wise man who builds their house on the rock. And when the rains come and the floods come and the winds blew and beat on the house, it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. Did you know that there's going to be storms that come against our marriage? There's storms that come against everything. The enemy wants to fight marriage because if he can break up your household, then he's damaged your children, right? He's caused them heartache and pain. He's damaged your heart. He's damaged your spouse's heart, and it just produces chaos and pain, right? Now, I'm not saying that there's never a time to get a divorce, okay? But in general and always, it still causes pain. Okay, so it goes on and it says, and everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell and the floods came and the wind blew and the house fell and great was the fall of it. So a wise let me just give you a scripture. Proverbs 14:1. And it's talking about a woman, but you know, the principles of God work regardless of gender for the most part. But it says a wise woman, or we can say a wise person, will build her house, but the foolish pulls it down. So whether you're male or female, a wise person will build their house, and a foolish person will pull it down. And so why does a person pull their own house down? And a lot of times it's because of offense. They're so offended that they'll pull it apart because of their emotions. Because of their emotions. And so we have an advocate with the Father. We have someone who we can take our emotions to, and that is the Lord. And He will help us and He will direct us. But in the end, we have to be obedient. We go from surviving to thriving. That's what David went. He went from surviving to thriving. He went from running from Saul to finally God vindicated him. And that's what David waited on all that time. David could have killed Saul so easily, but he waited such a long time for God to vindicate him. And he would not touch Saul himself. And when God finally vindicated him, right, then the next step was the enemy still fought him, but he encouraged himself in the Lord and he regained everything, and he was able to build the kingdom and be the king. David went from surviving to thriving. And that's the goal in marriage. We want to go from just surviving to thriving. We want to go from just complacency to engagement. I noticed recently with my husband, he had talked to somebody who was very engaging. That's like they hung off his every word, like, oh, that's so great. That's so wonderful. Everything you say is fantastic. And he comes home and I'm over there like looking at my phone, you know, while he's talking. And I'm just like not responsive. And I could sense just this little bit of frustration with him. And I thought, I don't know that I like that. And I thought, I don't know that I like that he feels good that somebody else is paying him attention. And then it occurred to me, you know, maybe I need to stop taking him for granted. And maybe I need to pay him attention. And maybe I need to hang off his words and listen to him. And then he would feel satisfied at home. And so we can build our house. We just have to make the decision to do that. I hope this helps you. If it does, share it. I'm calling it Monday Marriages. I'm doing it on Monday, but it seems like every other Monday. Just watch and you'll see, and you can always go back and watch the replay. Thanks for joining me, and God bless.